On December 7, 1930, in San Francisco, California, 35-year-old nurse Marita Cruz was working the night shift at the Magdalen insane asylum when she caught a glimpse of something scurrying down the hallway in the darkness. She decided to investigate, to see what it was. What happened that night left her in a comatose state for 2 years. When she came out of it, she was able to tell the events that took place that night in grim detail. Where she was found the following day, though, baffled authorities, and no conclusion as to what happened exactly was ever reached. This is the story she told authorities. Apparently, I have been comatose for the last 2 years. Every day since, I've been reliving that night over and over again. It's constantly replaying in my mind. I've been living that nightmare every day since. It was the middle of the night, 3:30 a.m. to be exact. I was sitting at the front desk writing down notes regarding an unruly patient I'd just given an injection to when I caught something moving quickly down the hallway to my left. It made me jump a little, thinking a patient must have gotten out of their room, but what I saw appeared too low to the ground to be a person. I was the only one around at the time, as my co-workers had just gone on their lunch break, and I didn't want to disturb them if it was nothing. I contemplated going and getting them, but decided to see for myself what it was first. I stood up from the desk, took a deep breath, and started walking down the hallway where I'd seen it. Since it was the middle of the night, the lights were off, and rather than turn them on and risk waking the patients, I went back to the front desk and grabbed the flashlight we kept there. I immediately turned on the flashlight and started slowly walking back down the hallway. This particular hallway was rather long, with several spots along the way that led to other hallways, so there were a lot of areas I'd have to check. As I walked along, I checked each door, making sure none of them were open, when suddenly I heard what sounded like fingernails tapping and moving swiftly across the tile floor somewhere in the darkness. I froze in place, trying to see what it was with the flashlight. "Who's there? Come out." "This is Nurse Cruz," I said. There was nothing but eerie silence as I stood there, moving the flashlight all around, trying to find what made the noise. "I need to go get help," I whispered to myself as my mind raced and fear surged through me. Something in me, I don't know, maybe curiosity, pushed me forward as I started walking towards where I'd heard the sound. I was coming to the end of the hallway where I'd have to turn a corner when again I heard the scurrying. I almost dropped the flashlight as my hand trembled in fear. Right then I knew I should have turned around to get help from my co-workers, but for some reason I kept walking until I turned the corner. As I turned the corner, I heard something behind me and felt something run up my leg as I shrieked out in horror. Whatever it was made its way up my back and attached itself to the back of my head. The next thing I remember, I was lying under a bed on my stomach with my head turned to the side. I tried moving but couldn't. I thought, what the hell is going on? When suddenly I heard footsteps approaching the bed behind me. The footsteps suddenly stopped, and again I heard something scurrying across the floor. The thought crossed be my mind to scream for help, but as I couldn't move, I decided to remain silent. I could only move my eyes as I tried looking around as best I could to see if I could see what was scurrying, but there was nothing in front of me. I then felt something slowly moving up my right leg. Then, without warning, it grabbed me, pulling me out from under the bed and out of the room I was in. I was quickly pulled across the tile floor. I tried guessing where I was, but since I couldn't move my head, all I could see was the wall next to me and had no idea where I was. I was dragged for a bit before I felt a sudden drop and realized I was being taken down some stairs, which meant we were headed for the basement. As I was taken down the stairs, which were metal and tile, it hurt like hell as my head hit each step. I tried screaming out, but nothing would come out. Nothing but tears streamed down my cheeks. I could then hear what sounded like hundreds of things scurrying across the concrete floor. I then felt the things one by one begin to crawl up on me until my entire body was covered. I was horrified as I laid there with these unknown things covering me. A few minutes went by. Then I heard what I thought was a man shout something from somewhere in the darkness. The things instantly got off me. I could hear footsteps approaching, then abruptly stop when they got next to me. I was then quickly picked up by something and carried off through the darkness. Whatever was carrying me reeked of something I've never smelt before. I can't describe it. It was horrible. It wasn't long before I heard that scurrying and again was covered with the things crawling all over me. I still couldn't move or scream. At that point, just lay there with only my thoughts. I wanted to roll my eyes back into my head and make it all end. I started feeling sharp pains all over my body, like 1,000 needles were being jabbed into me all at once. The pain was so severe I passed out. The next thing I remember was waking up and seeing brightness from what appeared to be a moon. I remember thinking I had no idea where I was at, but could tell I was no longer in the asylum. As my eyes adjusted and I could see clearly, I could see I was in some type of wooded area, but the trees and vegetation appeared foreign to me, unlike anything I'd ever seen in real life or in books. I'll never forget the smell either. It was the same smell as the thing that picked me up and carried me. I was still unable to move or speak, so I simply laid there. Right then I heard something coming up behind me. I frantically moved my eyes as I laid there or thinking for sure I was going to die. I then started, am I questioning my sanity? Am I dreaming? Am I going crazy? Where the hell am I? Suddenly, whatever was behind me stopped, and the body of someone was dropped to the ground right in front of me, inches away. I screamed inside as I could see. It was a young man, probably in his late teens. His eyes were wide open, but I could see he was blinking. He had a look of pure terror on his face I shall never forget. Whatever had been carrying the young man then moved off slightly, and I could hear rustling behind me. A few minutes later I heard it coming back towards me. It stepped over me, grabbed the young man by the hair, and pulled him away from me until he was about 15 feet in front of me. Whatever it was, it looked like something only your imagination could conjure up. It had long, smooth, almost beautiful, black hair. It wasn't very tall, but it was wide. It was wearing odd-looking clothing, unlike anything I had ever seen before. It had its back turned to me the entire time, and I could catch glimpses of the side of its face, but can't describe what it looked like. What happened next has been horrifically replaying in my mind every day. All I could do was look on with tear dread, knowing I was most likely next, and could only imagine the pain he must be experiencing as his flesh was being ripped and torn from his body. I watched in utter horror as the thing ripped off the young man's clothing, then proceeded to kneel down and start consuming him. The thing fed on him for a while before standing up and walking in the direction of the moon before disappearing into the trees. It never once looked back at me as I'd hoped it would. Even with everything that had been going on, I remember being curious as to what its face looked like. I stared at the half-eaten body of the young man for what seemed like hours. During that time, a lot of thoughts raced through my mind. I thought a lot about my parents and sister and wondered how they were doing. It had been months since I'd seen them. Of course, I thought about what was happening, especially where I was at and what the thing was. Did I die and go to hell? Was I in another world? I thought. A lot of crazy ideas went through my mind. I'd been laying there for quite a while when suddenly I was able to move my fingers again. Then within a few minutes I was able to move my limbs. It wasn't long before I was able to get up on my knees and then was able to stand. As I stood looking around me, I remember in that moment being the most scared I'd ever been in my life. When I couldn't move, I'd given up, but now there was a chance I could survive. I contemplated which way I should run and decided to head in the opposite direction of where the thing had disappeared into the trees. When the thing brought the young man, he came from behind me, but left in the opposite direction. Maybe where he'd brought the young man from was the way back home, I thought. Of course, I had no idea, but it was the best I could come up with. I hadn't walked in a while, and my legs were very stiff. I stumbled along as best I could as I headed through the forest. The further I walked, I started noticing the forest went from being very thick to becoming more open, and the trees becoming giant. I also noticed the temperature was changing. It went from being hot and humid to now it was cold and dry, almost freezing in fact. I'd been walking for a bit when I heard something behind me coming swiftly through the trees. I stopped and started panicking. No doubt it was the thing. I looked behind me but could see nothing. My legs were starting to feel better, so I knew I needed to run. I took off, running as fast as I could, but the shoes I had on were not conducive for running. The dress I had on also kept getting snagged on bushes and branches, which would slow me down. I tried listening for the thing as I ran, but couldn't hear anything. I decided not to stop to check, as it didn't matter anyway. I ran and ran until I was about to pass out from exhaustion, and without warning I was tumbling down a steep hill. Then everything went black. Apparently I woke up 2 years later, which came as quite a shock to me. Like I said in the beginning, over the last 2 years as I was comatose, I relived those events in my mind over and over again. It was a nightmare that would not end. Marita was found by some hunters the following morning, December 8th at 6 a.m. lying down on a road deep in what is now known as the Redwood National Park, over 300 miles away from the Magdalen Insane Asylum. When she was found, she was quickly taken to the nearest hospital, where they discovered she was covered in hundreds of little bite marks from something unknown. Authorities thoroughly investigated the incident, but never came to a conclusion. How she got there remains a mystery to this day. It's been investigated by numerous people over the decades, but never been solved. Her co-workers went to eat lunch at 3:15 a.m. with Marita still at the front desk. It's at least a 5.5-hour drive to the Redwood National Park from San Francisco, and she was discovered at 6 a.m., which is not near enough time to be able to make the drive.